We acknowledge the traditional owners of all Indigenous lands we live and work on across the country. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Hi, I'm Dylan, and welcome to part 2 of the Take Charge of Change podcast, brought to you by Children and Young People with Disability Australia as part of the Take Charge of Change project. The Take Charge of Change project is funded by the Australian Government, Department for Health, Disability and Ageing. I'm joined by the incredible disability advocates, Anna, Delphi, Caitlin and Freya. What is disability pride to you? I'm going to chat to Delphi first. As someone who was diagnosed with my disability later in life, I was really interested in kind of what the conversation that we had about disability pride and your relationship to it. So what is disability pride to you?
I think disability pride is really important, but I also think that it can become toxic, to be honest. It can become toxic positivity. For example, I might be explaining to someone the struggles of having autism, and they'll say to me, "But autism's a superpower, you're so lucky." And yes, autism has its advantages. I can focus on things for hours at a time. I can become very passionate about things. But there are obvious struggles to having autism. And I think that to have true pride in disability, it's not just talking about the advantages. I think that disability pride is just as much about acknowledging that there are downsides to a disability.
Yeah, and it's that, I think that's something that can be difficult for us as disabled people to think about, that is that, there are a lot of people that have low expectations of us, and we kind of want to prove them wrong, but at the same time, things can be really difficult. And I know that you kind of grew up, your mum was a big support and kind of like had a similar kind of neurodivergent brain, and so you never really felt kind of pressured to be really different or like felt shame in your disability?
No, I never felt shame in my disability. I always noticed that I was different from my peers. I just didn't really care, to be honest.
Yeah, that was the sentiment you were talking about, of just like being who you are, like unashamedly, which I think is like really admirable. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple people that are a bit more similar to me in that we kind of either were diagnosed later in life or we developed symptoms later in life. And it was, there was a period where there's a bit of denial about, oh, I don't think I really count as having a disability. And then kind of having to come to terms with that.
I think for me, I sort of grew up in a family where disability wasn't talked about much. And I think there was a lot of sort of like shame around, when you talk about having a disability, it was always like such a sad thing, whenever they expressed that. And I think for me, like when I think about like disability pride and like sort of my journey in trying to get a diagnosis, advocating for myself, trying to seek the support that I need, but also feeling proud of myself for overcoming challenges. And even though I live with a disability, I also do other things in my life as well. So I'm, proving the haters wrong. I think, disability pride means not feeling ashamed of my own disability and being able to express myself in a way that is authentically who I am. So it means I don't have to hide parts of myself or others to the world or feel ashamed of being different. It means that I can look at my disability and see the benefits of being different and use that as my advantage, whether that is my work or personal life. It means that I can challenge modern stereotypes of what people believe people with disabilities can or can't do. It also means celebrating the person that I am with my disability in other intersections and believing in myself and my own abilities. So really like giving things a go instead of putting up mental barriers for myself just because I have a disability, and celebrating my achievements, being proud of my progress. I think oftentimes, um, as a disabled young person, I'm always so hard on myself and I'm like, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? But there's also like, a moment of like self acceptance as well, understanding that I do have challenges that I navigate in my day to day life, and I need to give myself that grace and that self love and that self compassion that, the world might not be able to offer me sometimes. But I do have a really great support network right now. And I am sort of openly communicating about my disability. And I think I'm really glad that I have that chosen family who sort of support me in my journey, like sort of navigating my disability, but also celebrating who I am as a person. Because I think there's so much more to me as a person outside of my disability as well, that is worth celebrating.
I can totally relate to what you said about like having mental barriers to something and like never getting the opportunity to know if you would be good at it or if you could do it because like you already feel like you can't. Do you have kind of a moment, I guess, like growing up, having a lot of shame around the term disabled? Was there like a really important moment that you were in disability community and you felt like you really belonged?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, spaces like this, being with CIDR, but also um, within the work that I do in advocacy, meeting other disabled young people and seeing, like, having really good role models, and realizing that it's not something that I should be ashamed of, and that I feel like I belong somewhere and I don't feel like I'm an outsider. Because I think, and it's a bit of a trigger warning. I experienced a lot of sort of bullying in my life as well. And that was quite difficult growing up, thinking that like, I wasn't good enough, or, I was an outsider. But then finding these communities where I felt like I belonged had really strengthened my own sense of identity and given me the opportunity to put myself out there, and express myself authentically, and really be more visibly sort of disabled, and being able to label things like, oh, yeah, this is going on because of my neurodivergence, instead of, sort of internalizing and being really hard on myself.
That's really lovely. And yeah, like I think that as the years go on, these kind of community spaces will continue to grow and impact people's lives, which is really, really exciting. Caitlin, you, similar to everyone here, do a lot of advocacy on disability pride. What is your relationship to it?
I think there's so many ways that I relate to both Anna and Delphi. I do have a mum with disability, and so growing up, I felt like she was someone that I could talk to that had also similarly a dynamic relationship with disability. And that meant for me, I felt like to the outside world, I had to prove that I was able, and that these low expectations of me that were made by other people was something that I had to contest actively in every way that I lived. But the other side of that was acknowledging that, I felt the symptoms of my disability and they did really impact how I showed up in the world. That is no way to say that these low expectations are valid in any way. It just meant that the world around me didn't quite know how to accommodate and make space for me. And so speaking with her about it as I grew up, I think I was able to speak about disability really plainly without, falling into like an inspiration porn kind of trap, or trying to explain what disability meant to me or how it affected me in a way that also didn't lean into societal assumptions about what living with disability is like. So that was really powerful for me in being able to find disability pride. I think similarly to Anna, I felt quite alienated from my peers sometimes. I was very passionate about disability and disability rights. I think, from kindergarten, I remember advocating for myself that, these assumptions about me were wrong and that I could, achieve and do the things I wanted to do. So I think trying to make connections with other people without disability was really difficult. But something that helped me feel more connected was actually joining the CIDA Youth Council. And I remember finding out that I'd been accepted into the council, I think it was on my birthday, and just screaming and jumping around for joy. And it was, I think, the first time that I felt like actually a part of something that mattered to me as a person and my direction, and being in a space that I felt really comfortable to be myself. Even small things like being able to tie my hair back because I'm really insecure about how my disability affects my physical appearance, were all little things that signified to me that I was feeling comfortable in a space and that I hadn't felt that in other spaces. So part of my journey is realizing that a lot of these assumptions that people with disability can't do things also place an unworldly burden on people with disability to do everything. So I've been trying to, like I said earlier, trying to focus on saying no more to preserve myself, so that when I do say yes, I can fully show up in the ways that are meaningful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's the low expectations, and then there are the expectations that you see growing up of you can go and be a Paralympian, or you can start a kind of $1 million business. And I think something really powerful about finding other young people with disability is like, you don't have to celebrate winning a gold medal. You can celebrate just getting out of bed on a given day, going to a family event, like sending the emails you have to send, or, tying your hair up, or kind of doing things that you haven't had the confidence to do. Like, those are really big wins when you are impacted by disability. And I think that celebration is one of the best parts of having a community. Freya, I know that for you, finding pride in community was something happened later in life with a later diagnosis. So I'm keen to hear what that journey was like for you.
Thanks for asking, Dylan. It's definitely been quite, I guess, the roller coaster. It's not always linear. And I just firstly want to mention that this is probably a topic that I find a bit more emotional and vulnerable. So just for any viewers watching, my journey's so confusing. Like, I kind of almost forgot that I'm considered late diagnosed in a sense. And I also grew up with a parent who had some health issues of their own. I'm not going to talk too much on their journey, but I think something that impacted my relationship with disability for myself was I didn't know this person in my family was having health challenges until I was in like year 4 or something at school, and even still it wasn't talked about. And I think that probably had a big impact on like recognizing the struggles I was facing, but also how to feel about that, because of the fact that it was something that wasn't talked about. It was just normal to me, which is kind of a beautiful thing as a kid, that it's just normalized to us. We don't know anything different. That's our normal. Like, when I found that out, I was like, oh my goodness, are they dying? What's wrong? And then, because I found out through my brother, which is probably not the best way to find out. and then he's like, no. This has always been this way. It's okay. Don't worry. And I'm like, just so shocked by that, because I never realized as a little kid.
Yeah, and I feel like growing up, like not having conversations about health and disability, then becoming a wheelchair user is like, it's almost like it starts a conversation with everyone that you know, right? Of like this kind of visual indication of your health.
Yeah, basically throughout my life, I've felt like I was getting to a place with accepting my disability and being comfortable and proud with it. And then I'd be put in a situation in which I'd realize I haven't prepared for this. And suddenly I have to admit to myself, maybe I'm not as comfortable, maybe I'm not as proud as I thought I was. Maybe I was just pretending, or something like that, where it's like in certain scenarios, I could seem so confident in who I am and accepting of myself. And then the second I get put into a new space, it's a wake-up call that I was feeling that way because I was in spaces that were supportive and felt safe to me, both of which, that's just part of life. And as Dylan was kind of leading on a bit, was, I guess, the difference I found between the dynamic of invisible disability and visible disability and transitioning between the two. Yeah. And how that was one of those wake-up calls where I realised maybe I wasn't as solid in that as I thought I was. Maybe I wasn't quite there yet. Something that I really struggled with was being isolated from having a really hard time, probably partly with my relationship with disability and a lot of other things. So I was quite isolated for a few years. And then coming out of that, my disability wasn't invisible anymore. And in order to come out of it, I couldn't have it be invisible anymore. I'd be isolated if I kept trying to hide it. Something that I really struggled with was how I feel when I see someone who knew me from years before in public and how to approach that. Because I could be so confident as someone with a visible disability meeting a new person. But the second I was face-to-face with someone who I hadn't spoken to in years, it hit me that maybe I wasn't that comfortable or confident in who I am. And there has been moments where, thankfully, I've been proven wrong, and that's just my anxiety. And those moments came from things that seem so small. People don't realise the impact it has. I have this built-up anxiety in me of all the questions that someone's going to be asking me if I bump into them. And then someone just says, "Hey, how you going?" And I say good, and we part ways, and they have no idea the impact of how casual that was, how beneficial that was to me, because I realise it's not that deep. We're people living our different lives.
You don't have to give your whole backstory of like, this is why.
Yeah, we're just here to move on. Like, we're just about here and now.
And understanding that you're the same person too.
Definitely. Disability pride isn't always linear. It's not one size fits all.
Thank you so much for listening to our Take Charge of Change podcast. At CIDR's website, cidr.org.au, there is a whole host of resources under our Take Charge of Change project. There are more podcasts you can listen to. There are blogs of experiences of young people with disability. There's life planners. There's all sorts of things that you can do to tackle the big changes in your life. cidr.org.au.